Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Unmistakable. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Kelly Chase. Kelly Chase is an author, podcaster, and media personality who is passionate about creating rational, science-based media on-ramps to further the discussion about the UFO phenomenon with the public at large. Her podcast, the UFO Rabbit Hole, has been ranked in over 90 countries and is one of the top 1% of podcasts globally on Spotify. Starting in February, Kelly will be a monthly guest host on Whitley Strieber's long-running Dreamland podcast. She was also recently featured in the docuseries UFO Revolution and is the author of the UFO Rabbit Hole book series. In 2023, Kelly teamed up with J. Christopher King and Jordan Flowers to found a new media company, Ontocalypse Productions. Their first docuseries, The Beyond, UFOs A New Reality, will be released in late spring 2024 and will feature top experts in the field including Jeff Kripal, Diana Walsh Pasulka, Whitley Strieber, Michael Masters, Alex Dietrich, Paul H. Smith, Iya Whiteley, Greg Bishop, and many more. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest. Hi, Kelly. Welcome to Unmistakable. It's a pleasure and honor to be able to sit down with you and speak and talk about lots of stuff, I guess.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, our pleasure. So your work really stands out for its philosophical and intellectual rigor, your great communication skills, and also your deep sense of logic, which is something I really appreciate. I think in the public opinion and in the UFO arena, there's a lot of, we have an abundance of believers, hardcore believers, skeptics slash debunkers that are kind of pushing their own narratives, and they are trying to prove or disprove the latest photo, the latest video, the latest whistleblower or testimony. So it's very refreshing to hear a voice like yours, which is also not only concerned with transparency, with science, of course, with art science, but also and most of all with social sciences and humanities, which is our focus at UAP Education. So, of course, there's a lot of things I would like to talk about, and I don't even know where to start. So let's start with you. And could you tell us, please, what drove you into the UFO rabbit hole? If you had like a wake-up experience or something that may change your opinion about the phenomenon, and also how you managed to navigate into the sea of information, disinformation that, of course, it's out there, and it's pretty much an obstacle for a lot of people that get introduced to the topic.
Oh, that's a great question. So what's really crazy is 3 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about UFOs. I didn't believe they were real. I was very skeptical about most things in general, and I considered myself to be a pretty rational person in that regard. But in around spring of 2021, we were kind of coming towards the end of the pandemic restrictions, and I was going on vacation with my family to the Outer Banks, which was a place where when I was a kid, I'd actually seen a UFO, it's really interesting. You find that with so many people who've seen something crazy or they've had a paranormal experience, and yet they still they have that little outlying data point, but mostly they're skeptical, right? So even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really believe in them, even though I didn't know what I'd seen. But at the same time, this was just a couple of months before the first big UAP report came out in the US. And so suddenly it was in the news, it was on 60 Minutes, like people were writing about it, there was a lot of speculation. And so I was just like, what is this? What's going on here? And I had this week off. I'm really not good at taking time off. Very American in that way. And I needed something to kind of keep my mind occupied while I was on vacation. And I thought, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of this UFO thing. And needless to say, I was not able to get to the bottom of this UFO thing in just a week. But what I did figure out was that there was so much more evidence and information available than I ever would have believed possible. And I wasn't sure what was going on, but what became really clear to me was that something of great significance was going on. And that was kind of shocking to me because I'd spent my whole life kind of laughing at this stuff and blowing it off, just like everyone else. And so being someone who considered myself to be a really strong critical thinker, I was surprised that I'd gotten this one so wrong. And it kind of sparked this obsession in me, as it does with so many people who start, going down this rabbit hole, where I just wanted to figure it out. And so I started reading everything, but as you alluded to in your question, the problem is that it's really, there's so much information out there. A lot of it isn't very good. There's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of just sort of like sensational UFO-tainment. And while there is some great scholarship that's been done over the past few decades and is being done right now, it's really kind of hard to sort that out from the noise. And so I got really obsessed with that. And I just read everything I could get my hands on. I was just trying to figure out which way was up, basically. And yeah, it really sparked a passion in me, and I really loved it. And as I was going deeper and deeper into the data, I was at the time in marketing. So I was a brand director for an e-commerce company. I was like hoping to be a CMO by 40, but my entire career had been really built around messaging and content and that sort of thing. And so I really wanted to approach this problem the way I've approached so many other things in my career, because what I realized was that there was no on-ramp to this information. It takes a lot of time to get proficient in the actual like good data surrounding UFOs and to start to get a feel from the landscape. And so I really just wanted to create something for people who were becoming interested, because what I realized right away was that most people were not going to be crazy enough as I was to invest all that time into trying to figure it out. But if they had an on-ramp, if they had a way to kind of start at the beginning and just get a lay of the land, that would be really useful. And so I started the podcast with that goal in mind. And I wasn't sure if anyone would ever listen to it, and I was still working full time. But that was about 2 years ago that I started the podcast, and it's currently in the top 1% podcasts in the world globally right now. And I've been really shocked to see how many people are coming into the topic, and it's really fulfilling to see people at those beginning stages of realizing that there's something to this phenomenon. Yeah, and it's been a crazy ride. It's not at all where I expected my life to go, but this is what I'm doing full time now, and I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, that's great. I think you share a story which is probably similar to anyone's stories. I mean, I got a similar stories, and many other people probably we dismiss for all of our life because of conditioning, because of what we grew up thinking of, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, we just need to look into it. And if we just have the patience, like you say craziness, but I think it's more like seriousness and patient and really being passionate to discover the what reality is actually, because that's what the UFO phenomenon is about, in my opinion. I've learned much more about about humans, of course, than about NHIs, by studying the phenomenon. I learn a lot about how our psyche works, our mind works, and our prejudice. So, for example, what you think, I think like we always talk about debunkers as skeptics, of course. What do you think? Do you have any suggestion for example, for a person who thinks to be in that category? Sometimes I'm not talking about the debunkers, because the bias is very huge there. The fact that they want to demonstrate that something is false, and it's already a different story. But many honest, let's say, skeptics, even if I don't like the word, I think that we should be more critical than skeptic, because skeptic is already a bias in itself, can be a bias in itself. So what do you think about why so many people are skeptics, for example, even if we have lots of evidence, why they dismiss the evidence, why they do that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think, something that I think is really tough about understanding the UFO phenomenon, or even just considering that it might be possible, is that when you really dive into the data, what you realize is that if the UFO phenomenon is real, then it dismantles huge parts of our knowledge systems, like our meaning-making models and the way that we decide what is real and what's not in the world. And so I think that can be really intimidating, for one. And number two, I think that for very honest skeptics, a lot of them are probably like, well, I'd be willing to consider this, but if I'm going to throw everything that I know out the window and kind of start from scratch, like, what am I even going to be replacing this with? Right. And what's tough about that is that they had easy answers before. They had a sense of being able to just kind of give something a smell test and decide whether or not it's real or not real. But there are no easy answers on the other side of this question. And when you permit that the UFO phenomenon is something for which we have evidence and that it's likely true, even if we don't necessarily know what it is, you're kind of left with a vacuum, right? Because you're like, okay, so if this is real, all these other things that I thought were true aren't true. But what do I replace that with? And it's not easy, you know, like we talk about in the community all the time. There's like a bunch of different hypotheses about what this could be. You know, it's not necessarily aliens. There's a bunch of other stuff. And it affects, and so it takes a lot to be able to put down all of your programming over the years and to kind of start back over and rebuild your structure that you use to make sense of the world. And, you know, and I think that I think a lot of well-intentioned people are stuck in that place because we've got jobs and families and, you know, all responsibilities and things to worry about. And it's really destabilizing to go through that process. It can be really, really fun, but it can also be really kind of stressful and scary and isolating. And so there's not a lot of incentives out there to move forward with this line of questioning besides one's own sense of kind of curiosity and desire to get down to the bottom of the problem. So, you know, I think that that's why I really want to spend kind of my career in this space trying to create media and that sort of thing that helps people metabolize this information in a way that makes it more accessible to them so that that transition to this new paradigm isn't quite so destabilizing.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I had in mind to ask you this question later, so I'm asking it now. In addition to your podcast, you also just created a media company, and you're working on a docuseries. So you just mentioned that also your aim is to try to make it this transition less difficult for people who just approach the phenomenon. You know. So what are your plans? What could you tell us something of you're working on, if you can say something?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So back in November of this year, I started a media company called Ontocalypse Productions. And that name is kind of a portmanteau of ontology and apocalypse. Because, you know, we talk a lot about ontological shock in this space, but I really think that what we're talking about with the reality of the UFO phenomenon is something bigger than that. It's an apocalypse of all of our ontological categories. And so that's really kind of the focus of the work that we're doing. And we're working on a docuseries called The Beyond, UFOs A New Reality. And the basic idea behind The Beyond, like where the seed of the idea came when myself and then my friend J. Christopher King, who is directing the docuseries, we're really just kind of having a conversation about, you know, all of these docuseries that are out there. And there's been some great work done in this space. And this is not to like disparage any of that, but it seems like we've been in this kind of rut for the last, you know, since 2017 and even before that, where all of these docuseries that are coming out are really focused on making the case that UFOs are real and that we should even be talking about this at all. And so we keep kind of like retreading that same path. But there are a ton of people who are past that point. I'm seeing more and more of them every single day coming through in my podcast community and elsewhere. And what we really wanted to do was create something that started with the premise of UFOs are real, so now what? And so, and talking about what does this mean about the nature of our reality? how is it that we got this far and didn't know that this was real? Like what's been happening in the government, in the media, in education, in just the way that human psychology and human interactions work, that we ended up here in the first place? How do you deal with the ontological shock of processing this reality? And then also, we really wanted to, one of our jokes between me and Jay is that like we wanted to make a docuseries where no one sees an aircraft carrier. And not like, once again, not to knock anything that anyone else has done or the amazing work done by people and advocacy, like people like Ryan Graves in the military who are working towards greater transparency, but like for people who aren't interested in government cover-ups and military intrigue and all of that stuff, which I think it's a much bigger part of the community than we think, they have other questions about like, what do I do? How do I help? Like if I don't have a security clearance, how do I find out more about this? How do I help other people? How do I get involved? And we really wanted to highlight kind of grassroots level work of people, like yourself and like all kinds of other people in the community who are just kind of putting their skills and talents and energy towards communicating this more clearly to the public and giving them kind of a way forward. And so we're really excited about that. We filmed with a bunch of great people already: Diana Pasulka, Mike Masters, Whitley Strieber, Jeff Kripal, who is also a consulting producer on the project, and many, many more. And it should be out later this spring.
Wow, that's very exciting. Will it also will available in Europe, do you think, or you don't know yet?
Yes. Yeah, it should be. We're working to have it available. We're going to be releasing it on Amazon Prime Video and then also on Apple TV. And with at least through Amazon Prime, it should be available in most, if not all, countries. So we're working really hard to make it available because we know this is a global conversation, not just, a US conversation.
Yeah, and actually, I think Europe needs to. I can, of course, bring that experience. Europe needs to catch up with this reality. I mean, we have great history, of course. Jacques Vallée and France, Italy is full of cases. Of course, now it's very famous because of the 1933 UFO crash. But there are also north of Europe as some nice great study groups. But somehow the people seems disconnected with these, they just or that they assume that it's real, but we will never know, or they are just not very interested. They don't feel it, they don't breathe it in their everyday life, Excuse me. And I think that, like you said, this is not just a problem of governments and military, but it's something that everybody can contribute to solve, or let's say solve. It's a big word. Let's say to understand something more every day, something more about this phenomenon. Also, the common people, and of course, people that studies other disciplines like social sciences, humanities, independent thinkers, artists, whatever, So I think it's very important what you're doing, your idea to to try to explore a different path and not only aircraft carriers and this kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think you said something very beautiful that really blew my mind, which is and one of your latest podcasts, which is that ufology needs to be saved from disclosure, let's say, which I found it, wow, I never heard that before, and you phrase it in such a beautiful way. And of course, disclosure, and I know it is very important for you, for all your work you do, transparency, you fight for it. And so it is, of course, very important, but there are other ways to basically to get to know the truth about this phenomenon, So, of course, experiencer, for example, I know that it's also an aspect that you're interested to. What did you find more effective, for example? What do you think are the like strategic paths to get closer to know something, or to even engage the conversation more with the people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you were saying, I do think that in a lot of ways, ufology needs to be saved from disclosure, which isn't to say that I don't support the disclosure movement. Obviously, I do. But But what I mean by that, if people are wondering, is just that it's inevitable that what we're going to get out of the government in terms of greater transparency is going to be relative. I think that we can continue to push for them to be more transparent with us than they have been thus far. But I was just out in Palo Alto back in November at the Soul Foundation's inaugural conference, and we're hearing from admirals and colonels and high-level intelligence people who are really talking about how these decisions are made behind the scenes. Hal Puthoff even talked about the fact that 20 years ago, there was basically a conference of people within, the humanities, the intelligence community, and the military who came together to decide, should we do disclosure? And after weighing all the pros and cons, they decided no, that they weren't going to do it. And as frustrating as that can be, I think that we have to understand, not that we shouldn't fight it, but that the priorities of our military intelligence apparatus is to provide stability and to maintain the status quo. And they're probably almost never going to choose to do something for which they don't have a good idea of what the outcome is going to be and where they can't control the messaging, which is exactly what this would be. It would be opening Pandora's box, and they have no idea what's going to happen afterwards. And it also causes them to lose control of certain narratives. Like, for instance, the United States, every year we're getting closer and closer to spending $1 trillion a year on defense. And so if the government comes forward and says, oh, by the way, there are these things that are violating our airspace with absolute impunity. And by the way, sometimes they show up in people's bedrooms also, and we have no ability to stop any of this. Like, how do you continue to justify that price tag that we're paying for? Like, we pay a lot for security, in the United States. And so I don't think so we just have to understand that, like, we should continue to push for greater transparency. What they're not going to give us is the truth, like the full unvarnished truth. But the good news is that, like, we don't need them to, because the government can't lock up the phenomenon in a lab somewhere. Like, I believe that they likely do have crash materials. I believe that they likely do have bodies of some kind, but that is not the full phenomenon. The phenomenon is part of the nature of our reality. It's accessible to everyone. And so we have ways to move forward with our understanding of it without going through the government. And I think that we need to, because overwhelmingly, the conversation about what UFOs are and what ufology is being dominated by the disclosure narrative, because that's what's in the news and that's where we have the most activism and that sort of thing. So what I really suggest to people, if they want to try to understand this more deeply outside of that disclosure narrative, is, first of all, go back and read stuff from before disclosure kicked off. And not even just that. At this point, I will buy literally any UFO books that I come across that was written before 1975. Because when you go back and you read the stuff that was being written at the very kind of beginning of this movement, when it was just these sort of rogue independent researchers, before the government, I mean, the government's been engaging in disinformation in this from the very beginning, but it really ramped up kind of through the late 60s into the 70s. You get a completely different picture of what the phenomenon is. If you go back and read early, Jacques Vallée or John Keel, I think that that's a really good place to start. I think listening to experiencers and really understanding just how weird contact with non-human intelligences is, because the disclosure narrative has us basically amputate off the entire experience. We're we can't talk about that. It's too scary for people, or it's going too far, or we're just going to stick with the facts, but there's an enormous body of work around experiencers and what they've seen and what they've gone through. And so, yeah, I think that we just need to kind of look outside of the narrative that we're seeing on social media and in the news and all of that to try to get closer and closer to the source of what this phenomenon actually is.
Yeah, and I think the disclosure narrative, like you said, suggests a reality that's not necessarily what it is. It seems like, or at least it's a partial reality. We have these imaginary that you know, aliens coming from another space with physical objects and trying maybe to destroy or to conquer or to observe our military facility, which of course is happening, you know, but we don't actually, we cannot we cannot really know the reason behind that, because it's whatever they are, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, and extra like temporal, coming from another time or whatever. They don't think like us. We don't think like them. So it's probably very difficult for us to guess what they have in mind. So we could misunderstand things that, for example, for them, they are not intended to be harmful or of course, dangerous, for example. No, and I also think that it is something, like you said, that some people are not interested in this kind of stuff. You know, when they see the military complex, when they see investigators, when they see X-Files kind of stuff, they are not really into that. Other peoples are, of course, and so sometimes I realize that more and more talking with people, I manage to get them interest when they understand that this phenomenon has something to do with their life, with the fabric of reality, and of course it could be scary, like you said, but it could also have some clear advantages for us. It could be inspiring. It could move us to a different place than we are now. So I think that is, of course, for me, it's the most important topic around. So everybody should engage that, you know. Yeah, I think that maybe all your efforts, like working exactly on this aspect, try to get people to realize that there's something much more around the phenomenon that crash UFOs, experiments, and videos and photos. It's very important, and it will probably sort a very good effect. I hope so.
Yeah, and I think, one more point to make is just that, we tend to think of the UFO phenomenon in terms of physical craft, and that's what most of we're talking about through the disclosure movement. Yeah. But the reality is that like the majority, like well over half of UFO sightings don't even involve physical craft. It involves orbs of light, which we don't know what those are, and they may not even be technological in the way that we think of technology. And so, yeah, it's like you said, I think it's just the disclosure narrative is giving us just a very small window into a much larger question.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Soul Foundation, for example, and of course that's a must to ask you. It's a must to ask you something more about that. What were your reactions? And of course, after that, you are more confident that something will happen in terms of global, not disclosure, but global awareness, acceptance of this phenomenon?
It did make me hopeful. It was incredible to see, in some ways, even as someone who does this all day, every day, and definitely believes in the reality of the phenomenon, it was still really overwhelming in some ways to see that collection of, some of the top scholars and military intelligence officials in the world coming together and saying and talking these things through. There was a slide that was leaked from Carl Nell, that got a lot of conversation about, the catastrophic disclosure and all of that. But, that was just like one thing that was interesting about that slide. Like what was crazy to me was that we saw multiple slides that were like, these are slides that are being used to kind of make these decisions in the Department of Defense about this phenomenon. And so it's just like, it's kind of wild that we're still in this conversation about whether or not this is real, because it's just like, why would these things exist? Why would these people be talking about it if there wasn't something there that's real? It did make me hopeful, and I'm excited to see what the Soul Foundation does moving forward. In some ways, it really kind of triggered me thinking more about what we were talking about before, about saving ufology from disclosure. Because when I see what we're up against in terms of pushing for greater transparency, And like I said, I don't think it's super likely that the government is ever going to run that cost benefit analysis and say, okay, now's the time to tell them, because I don't think there's ever going to be a good time. And so I just think that we can move this, not that we should stop that push for transparency, but it made me feel really passionate and convicted about the idea that we need to be pushing this conversation forward in other ways, and that we need to really be modeling for people that we don't need to wait for the government to like hand us some scraps of information, that we can approach these things intellectually and scientifically and philosophically together from the grassroots, and kind of circumvent all of that bureaucratic mess that'll probably, if we're being realistic, like I think everybody's like, this is the year and they're going to tell it. I think it's going to take decades. I really do.
Yeah,
but for this to get where it's going, and I don't think we should let that discourage us or slow us down.
Yeah, and I also think, of course, everything is important, of course, to fight for more and more transparency. Of course, we don't need anyone who really dig into the phenomenon by reading and studying knows that the phenomenon is real. I mean, I guess it's without any doubt. We don't know maybe what it is, we don't know a lot of stuff about it, but we know that it's real. We don't need those kind of evidence. We don't need that clear picture, even if they are, honestly. I mean, the history of ufology is full of great data, which are just unknown for many people. They get ignored all days, but there's a lot of data and evidence. But so even if I think we don't need this thing, we can try to just keep going, studying reality and being more curious about reality, about the phenomenon that we encounter. And maybe the answer could pop up from something different, not just from ufology, but maybe like a new scientific discovery that just makes us realize, okay, so maybe that was real. So that seems to be connected to the UFO phenomenon, Or, for example, you discussed a lot the Plato's cave allegory in your podcast. I think I found it very interesting. And of course, when you think about that, this is a game changer for reality completely. It's not just an ontological shock in a certain sense. It's just rewriting reality. I mean, so the things that we believe, the thing that we call reality is not exactly what we think of. So there's a huge work to be done in order to rebuild ourselves, reprogram our minds. And I don't have an answer, honestly, for that. I don't know how we could get it, but I think it's really necessary. We cannot, it seems to me that we are called to do that. It's not an option, but it's probably a goal of humanity to get there somehow. I don't know if
I agree.
If you have thoughts about it, or maybe you found out the way to solve it.
I haven't found the way, but I think that we can find the path by walking, right? And I think it's really important for those of us who are in this place now of recognizing the reality of this phenomenon to just start walking and to start discovering the path and the way forward. Like, how do we deal with ontological shock? How do we set up, organizations and funding structures that can support grassroots initiatives? All of these questions that we have, I think, there's almost no field that won't be affected by this, from education to, even the legal system. So many UFO encounters involve telepathic communication and voices in somebody's head. And so if that's the case, then it throws all sorts of things into question in terms of psychology and the legal system, and how do we hold some, there's, and we're going to have to find answers for that stuff. And none of that's going to be easy or straightforward. But what I really do believe is that I do think think this is just the beginning of a much larger wave of awareness as we move forward. I think that the walls of secrecy are coming down and that they just can't. The internet and the way that we're so interconnected these days makes it a lot harder for the old tricks to work. They're coming up with new ones, but I still think that I think that more people are coming. And so those of us who are here now, like, we need to do all the work that we can to kind of prepare the way for this much greater wave of people that are going to be coming behind us, because, you know, because I don't think that we can actually understand what a game changer it's going to be for humanity. And that, like, in a lot of good ways, but it's probably going to cause a lot of chaos and things as well. And so the more work we can do ahead of time to kind of prepare the way for other people, the better.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. I always wonder why did we end up in this situation? Like you said, you know, it's like, for me, it's kind of almost unbelievable at this point to think, okay, humanity has never really understood that, has never really noticed that, collectively, of course, you know. And I really wonder why, and I don't know what really causes this. I don't know if you talk with somebody that clear that up a little bit, or is investigating this thing. It's just a limitation of our brain, or it is only cultural. It's only like lots of prejudice and yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really complicated, but some ideas that have helped me wrap my mind around it a little bit more are, like you were talking about, you know, Plato's cave.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a philosophy professor and author named James Madden, who I have on my podcast all the time. He's great, and he's really helped me understand a lot of this. And one of the things he's helped me understand is that humans are natural cave builders in the Platonic sense, that we create these caves together. And it's something that actually makes us really powerful as human beings, because, like, we have to have a shared understanding of what is true and what isn't true and how things work for us to be able to get things done. And, like, an example that James Madden has used in the past that I think is really brilliant is that there have been studies that have been done where they take where they're comparing baby chimps and baby humans, and they'll put, like, a treat in a box, and they'll show them a series of things that they have to do. Like, you got to push this button and stick the stick in here and do this, and then the box will open and they get the treat. And both chimps and humans are capable of kind of following that sequence of events and figuring out how to get the treat. But if suddenly you make the box transparent and they can see which of the things they're doing actually affect their ability to get to the treat, like if some of the steps aren't necessary, the baby chimp will just skip those steps and do what it takes to get the box open. Whereas human babies will just go through the process whether or not they actually needed to. So we copy each other in that way. And that's how we form our worldviews. And so I think it's partly that, is just that, like, that's the way we tend to think of human knowledge as this sort of linear thing that happens, where we just keep getting smarter and smarter and understanding things better and better. But I think it's actually far more complicated than that. You know, like, back in the Enlightenment, we made what was probably like a positive move forward in terms of, you know, introducing, you know, the scientific method and, you know, trying to be more rational and objective. But it's like the pendulum swung too far, because we went from saying, like, science should only study things that are measurable and tangible, to saying only things that are measurable and tangible exist. And so we kind of went a little too far. And so it's not that, like, we're asking, I don't think we need to, like, abandon science. Absolutely not. Science does amazing things for us, but we need to kind of swing that pendulum back the other way, in our collective cave together, and understand that, you know, that there are things that aren't as easily addressed by the hard sciences, but that doesn't mean that those parts of human experience aren't valid and that they don't exist.
Yeah, that's so true, and I also think that we are seeing something unusual and something new, in my opinion, because we had, of course, century and of religion and tradition, and then we got science, and it seems that we deal with them like if they were two different things, you know. One is the past, the prehistory, and the other one is just the beginning of our history. But that's probably not like that, you know. I mean, of course, all the religions of those time were informed by their realities and their understanding of reality, and maybe by the lack of scientific methods. But they got something that scientists didn't somehow, you know. So many tradition had a lot of intuition about the reality that science lacked to achieve. So I think that I don't know if you agree, but today, of course, with Diana Pasulka, we are seeing that, you know, like a professor of religious studies investigating possible connection with the UFO phenomenon. At first, I couldn't understand the need for religious studies on this topic, honestly. But then, of course, I realized that after all, religions were the first to narrate encounters with otherworldly beings or to search altered states of consciousness. So their study need to be part of the equation, and I think that
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
sorry,
I think religion is I think religion is a huge part of this. And I think that that's hard for some people in the community to maybe not, religion's maybe not the right word, but I
yeah,
mean,
because
spirituality
spiritual,
is, and I mean, religion is is like a codified,
exactly,
institutionalized expression
set of
of
rules,
humanity's interaction with like the unknown and the
yeah,
unknowable, right? And
yeah.
so like these things are connected, and I think that makes some people uncomfortable, but um I think we need to get over our squeamishness about that.
Yeah, and also I think, yeah, I use the word religion for lack of a better word in English, but of course
Yeah,
spirituality is much better. It's much clearer. And also, I sometimes I think that spirituality, we have given a precise meaning to it, you know, which is connected to religion experience. But it could actually be something totally different. I mean, lots of experience. Narrated by people who, for example, meditate or have so-called religious experiences, probably could have a different meaning. They are not necessarily what we think they are. You know, they could be something even deeper. So now we associate. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. We associate meditation with religion, for example. But it can be something totally different. Maybe it's really a practice, a scientific method to achieve different states that we don't know about. So I think it's a nice encounter, like spirituality and also science. They should get to know each other at least. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, and talking about books, I'm also very curious because you mentioned you read a lot of books. You mentioned a lot of titles and authors that also we suggest on our website. And which were your, let's say, three most important books? I mean, there are many sayings, many says that three books are, you know, enough to get uh, the minimum and enough also to get a good picture of a phenomenon. What were your three, the most influential books for you?
Oh gosh, it's hard to narrow it down, but I'll do my best. I think without question, American Cosmic by Diana Pasulka was my her work has influenced
Mhm.
me profoundly, and I've been lucky enough to get to know her a little bit, and she's been very encouraging of me. And I think that it caused me, when I read American Cosmic, it helped me flip out of that paradigm that I was in before, where it was like, it's UFOs, like UFOs are aliens, or they're, you know, maybe even a breakaway civilization, or this kind of like biologically centered view of things. And it helped me put it all in context in terms of history and religion and even the nature of technology and philosophy. And it caused me to be better equipped to ask much better questions about what the phenomenon actually is. I also really, really like John Keel. It's hard for me to pick a favorite book by John Keel, but probably Operation Trojan Horse. That's another one of his older books. And he looks really deeply into the phenomenon. And John Keel was a guy, I'm sure you know, but for anyone who's listening who might not know, it was literally this kind of just like guerrilla journalist who would just he was so disillusioned by all the disinformation in the community that the only place he would really get his information from was just like if weird things were happening somewhere, he would just get in his car and go there and talk to the people that it was happening to and record the data. And I think that some of the best work that's been done on the phenomenon and the most clear work that's been done on the phenomenon, which is not to say that it's easy, right? Like to understand, but it's confounding, and he was confounded by it. But I think some of the best data that we have is in Keel. And then with Jacques Vallée, I have to put him in the top 3 also. And if I had to choose a favorite, it would be Messengers of Deception, because I think that it really helped me understand the role that the intelligence community plays in the phenomenon and disinformation, and also just like belief systems and cults, and just how the phenomenon kind of interacts with humanity at these different levels, and where the secrecy and the misinformation and all of that, like that the sources aren't maybe as evident as we think they are, that there's a lot of complexity going on there. So those would be my top 3.
Okay, that's great. We will actually write them down so everybody listening can go and grab them. Yeah, they are great actually readings, and they are very important. So do you think that your wake up moment, the moment where you really understood that this was real, happened with a book or with an experience or whatever?
So I'm actually working on a series about it now. It would be hard to talk about because it's hard to unravel. But when I was maybe 3 or 4 months into studying UFOs kind of obsessively, I mean, I definitely at that point had figured out that there was something real going on here, but I didn't know what. But I did have a really profound experience one day where I experienced kind of out of nowhere, completely sober on a Saturday morning, this like profoundly altered state of consciousness. And I'm going to talk about this more on my podcast in the next couple of weeks. I don't mean to be vague. It's just for people who've had an experience like that, it's really hard to put into words what happened. But it changed my life, and it kind of set into motion the series of events and synchronicities and bringing people into my orbit who have become collaborators. And it's become this over the last 2 years, this like huge overlapping story that I feel like is nowhere near done, but I'm going to start telling it. And I think that a lot of people who start studying, UFOs, or even who get really deeply into meditation or studying other kinds of paranormal phenomena, will often have some kind of an experience like that, whether it's literally a UFO experience or an encounter with a being, which is not what this was for me, or just like experiencing a really profoundly altered state of consciousness that gives them new kind of insights and helps them kind of get to the next stage of their understanding. It happens. I've met hundreds, if not thousands of people over the last 2 years who have had something similar happen, and they often emerge much like I did. And so, and maybe this has happened to you as well, but like with kind of a sense of purpose and drive to kind of work in this field and to make a difference. And I don't know how to explain that, and I don't know what it is, but I am convinced that kind of emergent aspect of the phenomenon that happens when we start to study it is very real and powerful and profound. And it's the coolest thing ever. And so I'm really into it, and I'm excited to talk to people more about it, even though it's a little bit scary to kind of out yourself as somebody who's had an experience that would make many people think you were crazy. So, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah, of course, I think you should. And I also, thanks for also giving me this new topic that I also wanted to touch, the experiencer, the role of the experiencers. For example, do you? I think what or at least I hope that they will have a much more important role starting from now on. Because in the past, of course, at least in my generation, when I remember when I was a kid and I was reading stories about experiencer, I could not believe them. I was discarding them, immediately, and I was a very open-minded kid, but nevertheless, I was so conditioned to think like that, and these things were presented by media in such a way that nobody could believe them, and at least in my country, they were presented. Now, for example, Eyes on Cinema is releasing a lot of material recorded from the 40s, 50s on, and from many different countries. Whoever ran this channel made an unbelievably huge effort during lots of years to collect valuable information and put together the best archive of rare footages and interviews, TV and news programs, photo and video analysis, conversations between pilots and control towers, and of course, many accounts by serious and reliable witnesses. So today, there is really no excuse. With internet and channels like this one, it's possible to build an informed opinion about the phenomenon. And to listen experiencers, getting to know them and their stories a bit more. I think I feel that now it's a right moment for experiencer maybe to get how can I say get what the respect they should have received back then now, do you agree with this, or it's just my impression because I'm actually now understanding their experience and now listening to their experiences?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really passionate about the fact that we need to be bringing experiencers into this conversation. And, it's complicated for people because, and I understand why, when I started, I didn't necessarily want to look at all that stuff either, because when you really look at how people describe their contact experiences, they're very weird. It's not anything like we would expect. They happen in kind of a dream-like way, which isn't to say that they aren't necessarily real. It's hard for us to even sort out whether or not this is a physical phenomena or a psychic phenomena, but because there's so much mixed evidence, it's probably a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. I am somebody who personally believes that there's plenty of evidence that the government at times has also engaged in staged abductions, which then makes things even more complicated, right? Because they're getting in the mix as well. And so I think it's really, really complicated. And when people encounter a non-human intelligence, they often end up with missing time or screen memories, or they end up having really vivid dreams. And there's all these other things that happen that complicate the narrative. And, the paradigm that we've been in, especially over the last 100 or so years, I grew up in a family of psychiatrists. And so, I grew up in a place where, if you saw beings, non-human beings, or you heard voices in your head or something like that, you probably needed to be on medication. And I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who have genuine mental health issues that need to be addressed and cared for and taken seriously. But at the same time, I think that, I've met so many people who are major department heads at major universities, people who have designed some of the technology that you probably have carrying around in your pocket, CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. I have spoken to people who, and they just don't talk about these things because they know that they shouldn't. But the idea that these people are somehow completely crazy is just, it doesn't make sense, right? These are very high functioning, intelligent people, but they have a lot to lose, so they don't talk about it. And so a lot of the people that we do hear from are people who don't have a lot to lose, or who maybe do have some mental health problems that are causing them to not be able to self-select for what they should be talking about and what they shouldn't. Yeah. And it's just, it's very complicated. But I think our issue more than anything is that we have this model of mental health, much like the cave, right? Where anything that the way we decide if someone is mentally healthy is the extent to which their experiences and behavior comports with everyone else. It's like in anything that falls outside of kind of the normal range, we pathologize and we think there's something wrong. And maybe there's not something wrong. Maybe they are experiencing something that's outside the range of normal, but it doesn't mean that they're crazy. And so I think it's really, really complicated, and I don't think there's easy answers. But I think that I'm hoping that over the coming like decades and probably centuries, it's going to take some time that we develop better models and ways of helping people.
Yeah. And I think it takes lots of courage, as you said, like to come out with these stories, because you have a lot to lose. And of course, people can worry about their career, their families, friends, and but I also think that it's very important because sometimes we read the news. At least I remember when I was dismissing also this kind of thing, I was reading them in the news, and I just thought, that they were just stories, because there was just a name on a newspaper, on an article, just 2 lines of story, but I couldn't see the person. I couldn't listen him or her. I couldn't really get to know him or her. So I think that it's very important now that we can see them, if we can meet experiencers, that they can share their stories. People probably are going to react in a different ways, because the message is very powerful, and you can see they are not crazy. It's like it's very clear. So, and the more you know them, the more you understand that they got something to tell. So I think that I'm pretty confident that if more and more experience come out, the situation could change also in the public perception. I hope so.
I really hope so, because it's as hard as it is to deal with experiencer narratives. They're complicated, and we don't necessarily know what's going on. And also, it's really hard to prove the reality of someone else's like subjective experience, right? And I think people get kind of caught in this idea of like, is this true or is it not true? Are they lying? Are they not lying? And I think that when we get stuck there, we've already missed the point. I think that the better approach is for us to listen to a wide range of experiencers over a long period of time. Exactly. And when you do that, you start to be able to see the patterns that emerge, the similarities that emerge, and then we can start to create models that might be able to make us, help us understand this better. And there aren't going to be easy answers. It's going to take us a long time to figure this stuff out. But at the same time, if we just throw out all of the experiencer data because we don't know what to do with it, we're really messing up, because like these are, if people seem to be willing to entertain the idea of a non-human intelligence on this planet and high strangeness activity associated with UFOs and all of that, until someone actually experiences those things, at which point we kind of assume they're crazy. And so there's an incoherence to that idea. And I think we all need to kind of work on that a little bit in the community in terms of how we talk about these things. And I think that without experiencers being in the mix and being taken seriously, that we're not going to get any further with our understanding.
Totally. So Kelly, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. And of course, you are welcome back when you have some news about your show and also your new docuseries and whatever you may want to talk with us. So
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Bye.